started moving further right. And I think since sort of the Tony Blair era's come in, the support for Labour's maybe starting to drop off a bit as people start to distrust them. I still think there's a very strong Labour commitment here in Scotland, because although there's that feeling that the Scottish Labour Party is ruled by the English Labour Party, there's still this feeling that maybe if the Scottish Labour Party had a bit of freedom, they'd still be closer to the left wing than their English counterparts.
So, like, after an independence vote, Labour would come back in if there was an independent Scottish Labour?
I would think so, yeah. Because I think there's definitely an element of people who vote SNP currently who don't like the SNP but see them as a tool for independence, because they are the major player when independence is on the books. I must admit, I'm kind of that thinking myself. I'm not a huge fan of SNP, but they're a means to an end currently.
I can totally see that. So one of the other things that comes into play with this, strangely, is with the Premiership, like the idea of Celtic going to the Premiership. Do you think that some football supporters are actually so kind of pissed off with politics, like everyone in the general public is, that it's more of a political issue for them to keep the union so they can get into the Premiership than it is to get independence and have to stay in the Scottish Premier League?
Yeah, I think there could be an element of that, yeah. Funnily enough, I've never been an advocate of sending Celtic and Rangers to the Premiership, because I just don't like that league. I think if Celtic and Rangers were to go anywhere, they would be going to a European league, which would be a brand new setup. I must admit, I would think I was a bit of a hypocrite if I decided that during the summer there I was suggesting that Rangers should not be automatically injected into the top division, and then the next month I'd be saying, Celtic should get directly into the Premiership. Well, surely you need to start at the bottom.
Oh yeah, it's the only fair way.
Yeah.
Okay, what do you think we could do to convince more Celtic supporters? Although, like we already said, it's opinions divided and it's not as unanimous as people think it is. What could we do to get more Celtic supporters into the idea of independence, do you think?
I think one of the things we really need to do is decouple the idea that independence means SNP, because one of the biggest problems I've seen with people that might vote yes is this the feeling that the SNP are against us because of things like the offensive behaviour bill, and just this feeling that Alex Salmond thinks he's king. It's one of these. That offensive bill basically came in round about the time they were trying to get elected again, and there's this feeling that they went out to bat for such a ridiculous amount of things that didn't need dealt with at the time, to put this restrictive bill in that basically criminalises football fans. So there's a lot of football fans now saying, I don't want to vote SNP, I don't want to be left with a country the SNP get to run. I think the fact that they're almost controlled from London helps restrict them a bit. So what we need to do is get away from this idea that if we vote for independence, we're stuck with the SNP, because that's just not true. We're voting for independence for the country, not for the SNP.
I've definitely noticed that Celtic fans feel particularly victimised by this law. Could you explain about that a bit?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it was always going to be the bigger the fan base, the more likely they were to get increased attention from the stewarding and the policing at each of the games. But obviously, because I think when they were discussing this in the Scottish Parliament, there was a suggestion that this bill was to even things up, because they could already get the Rangers fans on things like the famine, so because that had been made, that was quite illegal. It just was no sort of grey area, whereas the idea that the singing about the IRA, for instance, wasn't illegal because the Terrorist Act itself is the illegal part, not showing some sort of support for the movement. Whereas now, because it might be deemed offensive to some people, or I think it's, any sensible-minded person, I think's the wording, perhaps. If it's deemed
very vague.
Yeah, it's a very vague one, but it lets them basically say if a sensible person thinks that's offensive, then they can get done for it, which could pretty much cover anything. But there was definitely a mention that this was to even things out, because they could get the Rangers fans and couldn't get the Celtic fans, and now they can get both. So obviously the Celtic fans are going to feel victimised by this, especially when you go along to not so much the home games, although the section 111 with the Green Brigade do tend to get extra policing because they're the loudest. But certainly at away games you tend to get a lot more stewarding. The police are always there to film you to make sure you're behaving, and anything they can get you on they might pull you up on. They're pulling out banners at the moment that are deemed offensive, which seem to bizarrely include the Palestinian flag. Not sure how that sits now that the UN's officially recognised them.
We talked about that in a previous podcast as well. It was, although we have to say allegedly and all that, but that should be covered under freedom of speech law, I think, although there are some objections to that. But there's been a history, though, with Tory governments. I used to be going to games last time was a Tory government, and at Hillsborough time as well, I was already going to games and stuff. And every time there's a Tory government crackdown, these kind of things seem to come up. Is there a suggestion that it's the criminalisation of the working class?
There could be an element of that, I suppose. But what we seem to be getting to the point of now is that football tickets are priced so high, the average working class man struggles to afford it, and yet still manages to find some way to do it. But yeah, well, now that we've got the seated stadiums, and we almost seem to be getting to the point that anybody that's deemed to be singing anything or shouting anything or any abuse whatsoever, which to me has always been part and parcel of the game. Like, you go along, you try and wind up the opposition, you try and wind up the opposition fans, they do exactly the same back to you, and it's all part of the fun. Whereas now what we seem to have is laws that are put in place to try and restrict that more and more, to the point that we're almost going along to watch a theatre. And I don't really want to be going along to football and watching the sport itself, because to be quite frankly, it's not that good enough for what we pay.
Certainly not when you consider the prices in, like, say, Germany, when it's a lot better than... but I think fans in general are treated like dirt in Scotland. One of the things the independence movement needs to do is to get involved with football supporters, because they're treated like dirt and they're treated like second-class citizens. I don't know if you'd agree with that.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think this all seems to have stemmed from the 1980 Cup final, where the Celtic fans and Rangers fans were getting charged by the police and all sorts, and on horseback, and that eventually led to the banning of alcohol at games here. And ever since then, there's always been this feeling that the football fans are a lesser class of people, whereas the rugby fans at Murrayfield get to sit and have their pint, and they're all very civilised, and what rugby's a middle class game, while football's a working class game. That's the sort of stereotype. We have got to that point, and we have to be careful of that, because we're seeing things coming out even this year about what happened at Hillsborough, where it was basically South Yorkshire police looking down their nose at the football fans that were involved and just treating them like second class citizens. I don't think we're going to get to the point that we have another Hillsborough. Certainly the stadium facilities and the safety and all that has been improved so dramatically that I don't think that's even possible again, which is a great thing. But we are getting to the point that there's going to be some incident, if we're not careful, between the fans and the police, and we don't want that. All we want is the fans to be going along, enjoying themselves and being safe when doing so.
Yeah, it's the thing, if you treat people like animals, they'll behave like animals.
Yes, exactly.
Sorry, I don't mean to interject again, but like, I was at a game, right? I'm ashamed to admit it, but I've got a brother who's an Aberdeen fan, right? And I went to a game the week after Hillsborough. And it was actually, because what used to happen sometimes was, if Celtic were at home, like, this is when I was, so Hillsborough, I would have been 12, I think, right? I used to sort of sneak out and go to Celtic games myself, but my big brother's like 7 years older than me, so my dad would let me go to a game with him, but he was an Aberdeen fan, so he'd pay for me to go. And it was Aberdeen v Hearts at Tynecastle. And I don't know if you ever went to old Tynecastle, have you?
No, it's pretty much how it is now when I was first there.
Alright, it was a pit. You cannot believe just the conditions. And they had the fences, like the fences that had caused all the deaths the previous week. And I've never seen anything like it. I'll never forget it, because the whole game, no one was even remotely interested in the game. There was a minute's silence, which was one of the most moving things you'd ever seen. And then for the whole game, oh God, I'm going to have to put a bleep or a warning, because the whole game, everyone was just singing, "Fences, fences, get to fuck." Or get your fences to fuck, It's amazing the sort of solidarity you can get in games, like even between both sets of supporters. Have you ever been to a game where that's kind of happened, like both sets of supporters have been going on the same thing?
I think so, yeah. Certainly there was, I remember going to the Celtic-Barcelona game in 2004, which was the day of the Madrid bombing, and the Celtic fans sang "You'll Never Walk Alone," and it was one of the most emotional nights I remember. And the Barcelona fans, there were certain elements of them that were a bit boisterous during the minute's silence, but some people have told me that was almost their way of showing sorrow. They don't do minute silences with there. I'm not sure if that's true or not, because there was another element saying, they broke the minute silence because of Catalan, it happened in Madrid. And obviously they've got their own independence movement these days. But certainly there was elements of the Barcelona support I seen there that were full of emotion when we were singing You Never Walk Alone. They were joining in as much as they could, and there was that everybody was singing from the same hymn sheet effectively.
Yeah, so do you think by criminalising football supporters, the independence movement is missing out on a big market? Put it that way. I hate to put it in capitalist terms, but there you go.
Yeah, I would think so. Yeah, if you can get the football fans on side, then that's a massive part of Scottish society. So if you start saying, "Oh, the football fans don't count, they don't matter," then you're just shooting yourself in the foot.
For Celtic in particular, I think it's not as clear cut as people think. I think there's quite a lot of Celtic fans, and I think you're proof of it, that are going to go for independence. But I think we need to work hard to get the rest of them.
I think so. Yeah, I think certainly. I don't want to show my bias here, but certainly of the two big Glasgow clubs, one of them flies a Union flag and one doesn't. Surely this should be easy to pick which one you're going to focus on. Not that they should, to be fair, not that they should be focusing on either one or the other, but one of them should be easier to get than the other.
Yeah, and one of the ways to do that would be to stop criminalising them.
Yes, yeah. If that continues, they're just asking for trouble in this referendum. And like I said, like the people like the Green Party who are behind independence, they're the right colour for Celtic fans for one thing, but they should be coming out and making it clear that independence is not hand in hand with the SNP. They might be the big leaders in the independence movement, but independence does not mean you're stuck with the SNP. You can get independence in 2014 and then in 2015, I think the next election is, maybe 2016. Might not matter depending on when it, because I think we moved it this year for the general election at Westminster. So if we're thinking 2014 for the referendum, 2015 should be when our election is, but it might be 2016. Either way, you can then go, well, I don't want the SNP anymore. They don't matter anymore because we've got independence. I can go vote for someone else. And from a different perspective, I'm not sure what the SNP themselves will do after independence.
Yeah, it's very possible.
There is a very there is a very good cause for them fracturing completely, because you've seen it themselves with the recent vote on whether we should be part of NATO after independence or not. There is quite a few of them are raging, shall we say, about the fact that was changed.
So independence is a beginning, not an end?
Yes, I would totally agree with that assertion.
So just to finish up, the last point is about you personally, not so much on the Celtic thing. So how did you come about starting to think independence was a thing you wanted? Is it something you'd always felt, or was there some moment in particular that brought about that kind of thought in you?
It's probably always been there. I grew up with I've got Polish background with the name, and I've got Irish background, and sort of both of them within the last 100 years have sort of fought to free their land. So it's almost like the Scottish part of me is the only bit that hasn't done it. So I don't know if that's maybe an underlying thing. It's just sort of one thing that occurred to me. But growing up, I've always been that rebellious sort of way with the Celtic fan at a predominantly Rangers school, and I was always one of the brighter kids at the school, so I tended to be bullied a lot. So I'd always find some way of rebelling against something.
Yeah, it's mad. School, you don't pay any attention to school.
I think one of the things I did notice when I was at school, though, was the complete lack of history when it comes to Scotland. Like I used to love reading about the likes of William Wallace and Robert the Bruce, and certainly we did a bit of Mary Queen of Scots when I was at primary school, but that seemed to be the focus of it. You did Mary Queen of Scots, and then you got to high school and you did like the First World War, which you did about 15 different times through your school years. The 60s was one focus in my history class, which I found bizarre, because I could go and speak to my dad about the 60s. But it was throughout the 6 years of high school, I was sitting in a form class every morning in the history department, and I could look at a map of Scotland about Robert the Bruce and William Wallace and everything that happened here, there and everywhere, and at no point had anybody taught me anything about it. So I don't know why that map was up on the wall in the first place. It just isn't Scottish history in Scottish schools, which to me seems bizarre, and almost like that's part of the oppression of the United Kingdom. They just ignore that, because even the Act of Union itself I had to read up on my own time. And I thought that's one of the biggest things that happened in British history. But apparently it wasn't important enough to teach in school.
Well, that was the same in my school. We learned about Robert the Bruce, but not actually William Wallace. And that was one of the first things we did. And then apparently nothing at all happened until the Industrial Revolution, when everyone had ricket. That was and then after that it was just the First World War and the Second World War. Nothing else happened in the meantime, apparently.
The weirdest thing about it, though, was I grew up within about 10 miles of most of where the battles took place. Like the Battle of Falkirk, the Battle of Barnet.